Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. This is the Chapel Sunday School class for September 21st. I'm recording this on Saturday night because tomorrow afternoon I want to be able to see the memorial service for Charlie Kirk that's going to be live streaming at 2 o'clock. But we're gonna be getting into the book of Jude. It's going to take us maybe just 2 weeks or so. But the book of Jude, a couple things about it. It is the fifth shortest book in the Bible. It's only got 461 words. So you'd think we could do it all in one day, but it's got a lot in it. Jude in Hebrew is really Yehuda or Judah. And you'll see that in your different translations. We'll look at that where he's actually named. But we know him as Jude. I never knew that this was one of the brothers of Jesus, of Yeshua, but he was. And so we're going to get into what this book is all about. It's a lot of warning about false prophets and the day in which we live. Mercy, there's a whole lot of false prophets out there. If you hadn't seen my series on prophets and prophecies, um, I urge you to look that up on my YouTube channel or write me about it. I'll email them all to you. It was 6 sessions. But got a little short video. I want to show you, first of all, this overview of the book of Jude.
Well, the book of Jude is about a issue that we face today, the invasion of false teachers into the church. Who is Jude? Jude is one of the half-brothers of our Lord Jesus Christ. Jesus had two half-brothers. One of them was named James, who wrote a book of the Bible. The other one was named Jude, who also wrote a book of the Bible. Both of these individuals, James and Jude, are writing to what we would call a Hebrew or Jewish Christian audience. The date of Jude's book would be about AD 68 to 70. It's one of the last books of the New Testament that we have. And Jude originally wanted to write a happy book, kind of a positive book. And he wanted to write a book, according to Jude verse 3, about our common salvation in Jesus, how Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians have the same status in the body of Christ. But because of the invasion of false teachers, Jude decided to write a negative book. And so what he does is he does a very negative critique of false teachers. And he explains how we should protect ourselves against false teachers. Because you see, Peter, in another book called 2 Peter, had warned that false teachers are coming into the church. Peter said false teachers will come in among you, over in 2 Peter chapter 3, around verses 3 and 4. And Jude writes a book and says they've entered. They're here. And so instead of writing a positive book about salvation, he ends up writing a negative critique against false teachers. And so his tone is very urgent. So the book of Jude really has 4 parts to it. Verses 1 through 4 is a demand for the letter. That's where he explains why he's not writing a positive book, but a negative critique. That's in verses 1 through 4. Remember, just one chapter in Jude. And then in verses 5 through 16, he really dials down and describes these false teachers that had invaded the church in fulfillment of Peter's prophecy in 2 Peter 3, verses 3 and 4, just written a few years earlier. And then in verses 17 through 23, he says, here's how we defend ourselves against false teachers. And that's where he talks about things like pray in the Spirit and build yourself up in the most holy faith and rescue other people from the negative influence of false teachers. And then finally in verses 24 and 25, he concludes with a doxology, which is a praise. And he's saying, because we, as God's people, are chosen and elected by God False teachers may be able to short circuit our growth in Christ, but they can't derail our salvation. So verses 1 through 4 is the demand for the letter. Verses 5 through 16 is a description of false teachers. Verses 17 through 23 is a defense against false teachers. And then verses 24 and 25 is a closing doxology. And then if I could just give you one thing to take away from the book of Jude, it's what's described in Jude verse 4, that we are called to earnestly contend for the faith that's been once and for all delivered to the saints. The truth of God has been delivered to us, and we need to protect that truth and defend that truth. We're called to contend for that faith that's been delivered to us, so that we can protect it and preserve it for the next generation, because the devil, through these false teachers, is always trying to marginalize that truth or critique that truth or to attack that truth. So just a one chapter book. I hope you will get into the book of Jude, and I'm sure that you will enjoy it very much.
So Jude 1, verse 1, Yehuda, I've copied this from the Sefer. I like that because it uses a lot of Hebrew transliterations rather than English words, such as Yehuda is the real name, Judah for the one we know as Jude. I'll call him Jude in this study. Yehuda, the servant of Yahusha HaMashiach and brother of Yaakov, that's Jacob, to them that are sanctified by Elohim the Father and preserved in Yahusha HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, and called. Now this letter, and that the video we saw, appreciate the pastor there giving an overview, although he said that Jude, that Jesus had just two brothers, James and Jude. Actually, he had four brothers, as we know from Mark 6. But this, and he called it a book. It wasn't a book, it was a letter. And we call it the book of Jude. But it's from Jude or Judah, or you will see it also written as Judas, servant of Jesus the Messiah, Yahushua Mashiach, brother of James. But he's also, as Galatians 1:19, but I saw none other of the apostles except James, the Lord's brother. But Mark 6:3 tells us in Nazareth, they said, is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Jude and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? So, uh, little Mary, who had Jesus when she was a teenager, young teenager, she had a lot of other children after her firstborn, which was Jesus. And we don't know anything else about this. We certainly don't have names of these sisters, and we don't know a whole lot about these four brothers, except that they became believers, according to John. That it thrilled his heart to know that they were walking in the faith. So he says, mercy unto you, and peace, and love, and be multiplied. Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you. See, like the pastor said, he was going to start out writing, wanted to write you a letter just talking about the common salvation we have. But he says, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that you should earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the Kodeshim, which is the holy ones, or the saints, the righteous ones. Just as in John's letters, Jude is well aware of the false prophets who are seeking to come against the gospel and put down the revolutionary movement begun by Jesus, Messiah, his death, burial, and the resurrection. And this word contend, English word, contend for the faith, it comes from the Hebrew word epagonizomehi. And that's where you see the word in there, agony, agonize. And that's the definition of agonize over, or it's translated defend, or fight for strenuously or vigorously, fight vigorously for the faith. Agonize over the faith. Treat it as something very, very special, treasured, and important, and under attack as it was by these false teachers. For there are certain men crept in unawares that how they got in there. They were literally like wolves in sheep's clothing, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation. They were of old ordained that Satan had a part in this. They were wicked men, turning the grace of our Elohim, our God, into lasciviousness, and denying the only Adonai Elohim and our Adonai Yahusha HaMashiach. Yes, they were wolves in sheep's clothing. Matthew 7:15, Jesus said, beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. And they didn't want to just disrupt things. It's ruthless. Those that sought to destroy the faith that was young, that the Messiah had come, but the Holy Spirit was much stronger than all of these wolves in sheep's clothing, as evidenced by the survival and thriving and growth of followers of the way to what it is today. Some translations say turning the grace of God into a license to commit immorality, turning the grace of our Elohim into lasciviousness. Like, and this is where that theology of cheap grace came in, that it doesn't matter really what you do, as long as you've prayed a prayer, you're saved by grace alone. It doesn't matter what you do. There's forgiveness. Overemphasis on um, just make a one-time uh, uh, tipping the hat to Jesus, or praying a prayer, or signing a card, or joining a church, and then somehow that is makes someone uh, a part of the forever kingdom. It doesn't work that way. 2 Peter 3:3 says, then there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where's the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. So many scoffers, and that's been over the past 2,000 years, saying that the promises of his second coming must not be true because he has not come. Well, a day is as 1,000 years as a day. He's only been gone 2 days, folks. 2 Peter 2:1 also says, but false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. It's like saying people that were brought into the fold, that um, made some type of profession of faith, if you will, but turned against it and began teaching false doctrine. Not something you want to mess around with. I will therefore put you in remembrance, though ye once knew this, how that Yahuwah, God, having saved the people out of the land of Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, afterward destroyed them that believed not. The wickedness of those wolves, this was their wickedness. They wanted to rewrite their own history and kind of write Jesus out of it, or probably more so forget their history, where they came from. They had forgotten who they were and what Yahweh had done for them. The ones kind of like those who came out of Egypt in the wilderness, it didn't take long before, they forget crossing the Red Sea, but then they started turning against Moses and going after false gods. The ones coming out of Egypt who did not fare well were those that forgot their history and turned their backs to the truth. And not only did people forget where they came from, not only did people forget where they came from, the angels which did not guard their first estate, but left their own habitation. What is this talking about? He has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Who are these angels? that did not guard their first estate. This is a reference to the fallen angels of Genesis 6. Now, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, there's that phrase, and this is referring to fallen angels, calling them still sons of God because he created them, saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took as wives whomever they chose. So Yahweh said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is a mortal. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. The Nephilim. Now I'm not going to really speak to this. His days shall be 120 years. There's some great teaching on that. Could be 120 Jubilee years, which is 6,000 years. That's pretty interesting. But the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and afterward as well, when the sons of God, again a reference to these fallen angels, had relations with the daughters of men. Get my pointer up here. 1 second. The sons of God, connected to these, had relations with the daughters of men, and they bore them children who became the mighty men of old, men of renown. And this is very intriguing. Bible scholars have debated all of this because it's not exactly clear who came when and where the Nephilim came from, and why are they called mighty men of old, men of renown? Is that good or bad? I think in the translation, yes, they were mighty, they were strong. These are the giants. They were of renown, not in a good way. They were just, they instilled fear in people, just like the 12 spies. They went and 10 of them saw these giants and said, these are men of renown and very mighty. We can't take them. Of course, Joshua and Caleb said, yes, we could. He has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Well, what happened to these fallen angels, these Nephilim? Um, some say, well, they were killed in the flood. But remember, these entities, just as we humans, had spirits, whereas their physical bodies might have been destroyed, their spirits still lingered. The imagery of eternal chains and darkness signifies a state of confinement and judgment. This is not a physical binding, but a spiritual one, indicating a restriction of their power and influence. Nothing happens on this earth except through our Creator's permissive will. Satan is the prince of the airwaves. He's the prince of darkness in this earth, and his demons and minions as well. They are a defeated foe. And when this talks about them being in chains, in everlasting change under darkness, yes, that is that's their destiny. But yet, it's the question: are these spirits, these demonic spirits, still active? Are they different? Are the Nephilim different from normal demons, if you can use that? A lot of questions that I can't answer. But the Nephilim are described in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in Genesis as 6, as a group of giants and mighty warriors who existed before the great flood. They are often interpreted as the offspring, here what we just read about, as of the sons of God and the daughters of men, leading to various interpretations about their nature and origin. The Nephilim are sometimes viewed as heroes of old or men of renown. Maybe they were heroes to some, but they certainly with the Philistines, Goliath was their hero, but they are also associated with acts of great evil, according to some non-biblical texts, such as the book of Enoch. And when it says non-biblical, that just means text scriptures that were not canonized. This doesn't mean that they were never scriptures. They were not canonized by the Catholic Church. And so our Bible mentions several of these non-biblical texts, such as the book of Enoch. And the book of Enoch does speak more about these Nephilim. Some of the questions that can be raised if it is true about the sons of God having sex with the daughters of men, um, you know, did they have sex in this while they were giants, or did they produce infants that grew into giants? Um, what size were these babies when they were born, if that's the case? A lot of questions that are hard to answer. Okay, I want to show you, I have a couple videos in this lesson, sources that could teach us better than I could. This first one is a little shorter than the second one. I think it's about 5 or 6 minutes, but is an explanation for who the Nephilim are. So let's watch this.
The Hebrew Bible contains many interesting and supernatural creatures, one of the most mysterious of these being the Nephilim, first introduced in Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim are described as heroes of old, men of renown, but the identity and origin of the Nephilim are still surrounded in mystery to this day. Some call them demons, some call them giants, but to find out who the Nephilim truly were and where they truly came from, I journeyed deep into the scriptures, and what I found out about these people is much more fascinating than I ever expected. You see, the word Nephilim, a Hebrew word meaning the fallen ones, only appears in the Bible 3 times. First in Genesis 6 verse 4, second in the book of Numbers, and third in a secret lesser known passage in Ezekiel. Based on these passages alone, we can't conclude much about the identity or origin of these creatures, but what we do know is this: the Nephilim were a race of giants. In the book of Numbers, the Israelites are on the cusp of entering the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a symbol of abundance and plenty. But there's a problem. There are several Gentile nations occupying the land, enemies of Israel. So Moses elected 12 men and sent them out as spies into the promised land. When exploring, they reached the land of Hebron, where they came across 3 important figures: Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak. Upon returning home, the spies reported about the men they saw to Moses. Caleb, one of the spies, spoke up and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." The descendants of Anak, otherwise known as the Anakim, were a race of people descendant from the original Nephilim. Whenever the Bible refers to the Anakim, they are associated with large stature, great size, or mighty strength. The people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to the sky. And moreover, we have seen the sons of Anakim there, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim. Who can stand before the sons of Anak? These people, along with other races of giants like the Rephites and Emim, dominated the land until Joshua and the Israelites utterly destroyed them with their cities. We can safely say that the Nephilim were a race of giant people, but the mystery only gets deeper and more twisted when we ask the question, where did the Nephilim come from? To answer this, we must return to the first appearance of the Nephilim in Genesis 6, 1-4, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The most commonly held view of the Nephilim's origin is that they are the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of humans. But the meaning of these two terms is hotly debated, especially the term sons of God. The phrase sons of God appears in the Hebrew Bible a total of 5 times. The first in Genesis 6, the second, third, and fourth in the book of Job, and the 5th in the book of Daniel. The appearances in the book of Job all seem to have one thing in common. common. The sons of God here seem to be some kind of angelic beings. The Daniel passage uses the phrase, a son of God, and is mentioned as the fourth person in the fiery furnace, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, alluding to some form of angel, some even believing an early appearance of Christ himself. So it seems like the sons of God referred to in Genesis 6 were angelic beings. But how were angelic, immaterial servants of God marrying and sleeping with human women? Jesus himself says in the Gospel of Matthew, "For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven." Some people say that Jesus' words refute the theory that the sons of God in Genesis are angels, because angels can't marry. But the key is in the last two words of the verse, in heaven, implying that the angels in Genesis were fallen. The idea of fallen angels is supported by two very important New Testament Bible passages. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, and the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling place, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they, in the same way as these angels, indulged in sexual perversion and went after strange flesh, they exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Knowing that some angels did in fact fall from heaven and breed with humans, it makes sense that their offspring would be different, resulting in the monstrous size and might of the Nephilim, and the giants that followed generations later. Though it's the most commonly held view of the Nephilim's origin, there is one problem in the theory. Listen carefully to the phrasing of these words. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of mankind. Some have taken this passage to say that the Nephilim were already on the earth before the fall of the angels. This would mean that they aren't the offspring of the fallen angels and humans. In fact, some go as far as to say that the author of Genesis, Moses, is specifically mentioning the Nephilim alongside the fallen angels to highlight the separation between the two groups. One theory is that the Nephilim were descendants of Seth, the faithful son of Adam, making them fine warriors and men of renown. Another theory suggests they were simply a genetic mutation, which caused extreme growth. Are the Nephilim a race of demonic giants who terrorized nations for centuries, or were they simply large people? I'm not confident to provide the answer, so I want to ask all the biblical scholars, pastors, and teachers online where you think the Nephilim came from. Otherwise, these fascinating people will remain a mystery for the rest of time.
Oh, the narrator of that last video, he did a good job, but he kind of surprised me. He left the question about Nephilim. He just threw it back at us, at me, at pastors and teachers to give our opinion. And I don't think I'm any more qualified than that gentleman to give a definitive answer about the Nephilim and who they are, what they are, where they came from, what is their role today in times. But we do know, this is what I believe, the Nephilim in the Bible were superhuman giants born from unions between divine beings and mortal women, known as the fallen ones. According to the book of Enoch, the Nephilim story is expanded upon, introducing rebellious angels called the Watchers, who bring monstrous giants into the world. Now, the book of Enoch is not in the Bible. It is considered scripture. It was just not canonized. The Bible is a collection of scriptures that were canonized by the Catholic Church. Now, several of these books are mentioned in our Bibles. The book of Enoch is. Enoch and Jubilees, um, and books like, well, we got the book of Ezra, but there's also Fourth Ezra. This was Jeremiah's scribe, that he wrote other books that just didn't make it into the Bible. Some of these books are said to have been written more for the end times, and so they weren't included into the Bible. But I want to show you this video that gives you a little bit more of the Nephilim as described in the book of Enoch. And this video is about 18 minutes, so this is what we're going to conclude with. But I'll wrap it up after this next video.
Many by now will know of the apocalyptic Hebrew text of the Book of Enoch, a text that is ascribed to the patriarch Enoch. who was the great-grandfather of Noah. Whilst the book contains events that coincide with biblical understanding, such as the flood, it also contains many aspects that are not considered biblically canon, or at least aspects that the average reader would not have considered, because the Bible alone doesn't deem it necessary to explain. Of course, I'm mainly talking about the Watchers, the sons of God, who were essentially angels who in the Book of Enoch go against God's wishes and impregnate the mortal women. The Watchers, who in retrospect are fallen angels, are not exactly acknowledged by the Bible, but in the Book of Enoch they are key characters that serve as a catalyst for both the terrible things that come to plague the earth and also the reason why God sends a flood at all. As the Watchers impregnate the mortal women, this unholy union leads to the women producing monstrous offspring, giants with unsatiable appetites and rageful tendencies. They are known simply as Nephilim. In today's episode, we'll be exploring what exactly happened to the Nephilim across multiple stories, including the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, which is a fragmented Jewish follow-up to the Book of Enoch that details the Nephilim's fate, and the Bible, which interestingly does show us in several subsequent chapters that the giants remained on the earth in the days after Noah, which means that somehow they either survived the flood or were put back on the earth for some reason. According to Enochian legend, the Nephilim are born to the Watchers, courtesy of their human mothers, who were either seduced or arguably raped by the fallen angels during those times. Whilst it is not detailed if the Nephilim were born as giant babies, or somehow born fully grown, we do know that they are monstrous, esurient, wicked beings that not only consume all the crops, trees and animals, but also consume the mortal men, women, and at one point, even themselves, as they turned cannibal. The world was in distress, and the cry of the people reached the ears of God, who was displeased to learn of what had transpired. His angelic watchers had betrayed him, and now they'd brought forth a horde of creatures that were destroying the earth itself. In order to restore balance, God sent down his archangels to purge the evil that had coalesced on the earth. Archangel Michael was sent to do battle against Samyaza, the leader of the Watchers who had not deterred his angels from committing sin and transitioning into fallen angels. Archangel Raphael was sent to apprehend Azazel, a Watcher who had also shared the secrets of heaven with mankind and taught them how to fight and wage war on each other. Archangel Uriel is sent to warn Noah of what is soon to happen, that there will be a great deluge, and that he should hide himself until then, because he and his family are the chosen ones to survive, whilst everything else on the earth will be destroyed and made new again. Archangel Gabriel, meanwhile, is sent to thin the horde of the Nephilim, as God tells him, "Proceed against the bastards and the reprobates, and against the children of fornication, and destroy the children of fornication, and the children of the Watchers from amongst men, and cause them to go forth. Send them one against the other, that they may destroy each other in battle. For length of days they shall not have. And no request that they, i.e. their fathers, make of thee, shall be granted unto their fathers on their behalf. For they hope to live an eternal life, and that each one of them will live 500 years. As we can see from these interactions, we learn quite quickly that whilst the Nephilim did run riot on the earth, their days were numbered. Indeed, Archangel Gabriel is seen to go on a killing spree, as he reduces the number of Nephilim that are running rampant. Any that he manages to miss are taken care of by the flood, which God sends to destroy all life on earth, except for Noah and his family. Now, whilst all the giants do drown in the flood in this story, we are told that their spirits survive, and that from then onwards, they would be known as evil spirits that dwell on the earth. Of these spirits, God tells Enoch, "And the spirits of the giants will afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth, and cause trouble. They will take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst, and cause offences. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of men, and against the women, because they have proceeded from them." So indeed, the physical giants are destroyed, and they can no longer consume the landscape of the earth. They can no longer terrorize mankind, nor can they go about their violent rampages. For all intents and purposes, the reign of the giants ends here. But as God tells Enoch, they do remain on a spiritual plane, where they can oppress, destroy, attack, and work destruction on the earth. Arguably, they are not dead at all, considering that in their spiritual form, they continue the exact same behaviour that they did when they were physically living. So in this aspect, you might say that the Nephilim did survive the flood, just not as they had originally intended. We do know why God keeps the Nephilim alive in this capacity, and that's to apparently punish mankind for their involvement with the Nephilim's production, and for the events that had transpired. The men, as we learned from the Enochian legend, had fallen for the Watcher's knowledge, and lapped up the secrets of heaven that the Watchers had revealed, whilst the women had allowed themselves to be seduced by the Watchers, assuming we go with the idea that they were seduced and not taken against their will. In effect, God kinda blames mankind for the Nephilim too, so he allows the Nephilim to live in their spirit form to punish mankind for their transgressions. These events coincide with the apocryphal Jewish book, the Book of Giants, though of course in this story, the perspective is shifted to that of the Nephilim. Specifically, we see the giant Marwe come to terms with the nightmares that he and his fellow giants are experiencing, and they begin to fret over the possibility that these dreams are signs that they have done terrible things, and would be punished for them. Eventually, Marwe is convinced to visit Enoch, who they believe can interpret the dreams, for which Enoch reveals is indeed a bad omen for the giants, who will pay for the carnage they have amassed and never know peace. However, there is implied hope for the Nephilim, because Enoch explains that if they change their ways, and if they relinquish the bonds of evil, they will be forgiven. Unfortunately, it would appear that either none of the Nephilim were able to repent, or God wasn't feeling particularly forgiving, because none of them appear to be spared. As with the Enochian legend, God does send a flood to wipe out the Nephilim, and those that are able to escape the flood are hunted down by angels. In fact, in the Manichaean version of the Book of Giants, God actually sends down the biblical monster Leviathan to mop up those who have escaped drowning. Ultimately, both texts are so fragmentary that it is hard to come to a definitive conclusion, though it is agreed that from what we have, the giants are destroyed by God, either in the flood or by the angels he sends to have at them. In the Bible, meanwhile, the Nephilim are acknowledged as having existed, as we are told in Genesis, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. As we can see here, the Bible does not go into the detail that the Book of Enoch does with the Watchers, and just how the Nephilim were created unto the world. Indeed, we are told that the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them, and this is the closest we get to the suggestion that angels had impregnated women. That is, if we go with the idea that the sons of God are not men, but actually angels. When the flood does arrive in the next chapter, the Bible does not subscribe to the idea that the Nephilim continue to exist as evil spirits on the earth. Once the flood comes, it is implied that they, amongst every other creature that didn't make it onto the ark, were destroyed in totality. We are told, the waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits. Every living thing that moved on the land perished. Birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swam over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals, and the creatures that move along the ground, and the birds were wiped out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. So with this in mind, it should be pretty much guaranteed that we'd never see the Nephilim again, right? Well, not exactly. Several chapters later, in Numbers, we are told that Moses sends several men to scout and explore Canaan, which has been promised to be given to the Israelites by God, so that they might discover what the land is like, whether the people who live there are weak or strong, whether the towns are fortified or unprotected, whether the soil is fertile or poor, and generally to find out what kind of resistance would await them. Now, the scouts do go out across Canaan and learn many things. They find fruit of the land, they find milk and honey, they research the people who live there, the Canaanites, and find them to be very powerful, who live in cities that are large and fortified. But there is one discovery they make in Canaan that they probably wish they hadn't. The Nephilim had seemingly returned. The scouts report to Moses, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are," and they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them." So how could this be if the Nephilim were destroyed in the flood during the times of Noah? A simple, albeit baseless idea is that the flood wasn't as thorough as we are led to believe, and that perhaps the Nephilim were able to navigate the turbulent waters and somehow find their way to dry land once the water levels reduced. Another similar idea is that the Nephilim, after being warned by Enoch of their fate, as they are in the Book of Giants, went into hiding and were somehow able to escape the flood through either some clever ingenuity or some archaic magic. Of course, these ideas seem two-dimensional and lack any real substance that is really convincing. They're more akin to those bad Star Wars movies, where somehow Palpatine returned, and likewise, somehow the Nephilim returned too. So how do we come up with a more legitimate explanation? Well, to do that, we'll need to acknowledge that perhaps these aren't the same Nephilim from the days of Noah, because all of those were indeed wiped out in the flood, but that these Nephilim are brand new, or at least more recent. If we assume that these more recent Nephilim were created the same way that the originals were, then it might be suggested that there were other fallen angels who had fallen into the same trap as the Watchers, and had come down to Earth to lay with the mortal women. The original Watchers, according to the Enochian legend, were rounded up by the archangels and actually cast down into an underground prison, thousands of miles beneath the desert, known as the Duodel. These angels, according to the legends, are said to still be there now, where they undergo great suffering and torment for their open rebellion against God, and for their infringement upon his rules. As the events of Numbers take place many years after the times of the Watchers, or the Sons of God, it can be assumed that these were also brand new angels who had fathered these Nephilim, those who evidently did not learn from the mistakes of those who had come before them, or perhaps didn't know about them altogether. Another idea here is that indeed, the angels, regardless of their time of existence, did know about the folly of the Watchers, but that they were still unable to resist the temptation of mortal women, hence why Nephilim are reported as being seen here in Canaan. But if we don't think that the angels would make the same mistake twice, there are some other ideas available, one of which causes us to challenge the idea that the sons of God, as mentioned in Genesis 6:4, applies to angels or whether it applies to men. Now, if men are actually these sons of God, then men are the ones who bring forth the Nephilim by sleeping with women. But how can this be? Well, again, there's a lot of speculation here. But one idea is that when Canaan, who is Noah's son and the first Canaanite, is cursed by his father, his descendants become cursed too. The sons of Shem and Japheth, those being Canaan's brothers and thus the nephews of Canaan, may have at some point intermingled with the daughters of Canaan, this being something of a violation in the eyes of God. Time and time again, we see God warn those a part of his covenant not to make wives out of the Canaanite women, yet time and time again, we see many of the covenant do exactly that. These new Nephilim, therefore, can be seen as a direct consequence of the chosen people of Israel, who have fornicated with the cursed people of Canaan, furthermore exemplifying why the two did not belong together, because together they could only create something as abominable as more Nephilim. Unfortunately, this is only a simple idea that cannot be substantiated, and it is indeed more likely that the sons of God refer to fallen angels, because man would be the son of man, this man being Adam, not God. This brings me to the final idea I have on this account from Numbers 13, the idea that the scouts hadn't seen Nephilim at all, but either mistook some of the tall men of Canaan for giants, or had been so afraid about invading Canaan, with its reinforced cities, strong fortifications and powerful men, that they made the whole thing up to dissuade Moses from agreeing with Caleb, who wanted to go up into Canaan and take the land by force. you'll notice that Numbers tells us that the scouts spread a bad report, which implies that whatever he told Moses was either a misinterpretation down to sheer ignorance or a complete fabrication made out of fear for the Canaanites. The idea that the scouts were fearful of the Canaanites, leading them to make up the report about the Nephilim, can be legitimized by the fact that the scout does declare to Moses that they cannot attack the Canaanites because he believed they were so much stronger than them. On the other hand, the idea that the scout had simply misinterpreted what he saw can also be legitimized by the scout's report that the descendants of Anak had come from the Nephilim, and that these were the giants he was supposedly seeing. Anak, a word believed to mean giant in Hebrew, was also a minor character in the Bible, and is named as being the progenitor of the Anakites, or the Anakim, these being the people who inhabited Canaan before the arrival of the Israelites. Of course, this just leaves us with more questions. How did these Anakim come into existence? How tall were they? Were they as big and ferocious as their Nephilim forefathers? Or were they smaller and more docile? What was their nature in comparison to their evil fathers? And perhaps more importantly, were they a product of Nephilim human relations, or were these the product of men sleeping with Canaanite women, hence why they existed after the flood? Unfortunately, we may never really know. What we do know is that the biblical attitude towards both Nephilim and Anakim is similar. Both are living examples of sin, and both are destined to be removed from the earth. The Nephilim, as we know, were removed by the flood, but the Anakim, as we later learn in the Bible, are all destroyed by Caleb and Joshua. We are told specifically of this in Joshua's chapter. At that time, Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir and Anam, from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them and their towns. Beyond Joshua's encounter with the Anakim, we don't see the giants maintain any significant prominence that would indicate they were too much of a problem. Indeed, we do see David run into what can be presumed as giants in the second book of Samuel, where he and his mighty men face off against Ishbi-Benob, a giant wielding a spearhead that weighed 300 shekels, Goliath's brother, and a giant man with 6 fingers and 6 toes, who some scholars make effort to attribute to Gilgamesh. These giants are all believed to have been descended from Rapha, those who take on the name Rephaim, to likely delineate themselves from the likes of the Nephilim and the Anakim. So by this logic, whether we're talking about Rephaim, Anakim, or any other kind of giant in the Bible, it's not totally out of the realm of possibility that they have at some point been simply grouped as Nephilim, because of how big they were. Those who are said to see these giants in biblical times would not have lived during the times of the flood, so they could not have possibly known whether the giants they saw were Nephilim or not. Yet because of how fierce and terrifying and abnormal they appear to be, the word Nephilim is easily assigned to them, as we see the scout do in Numbers 13. Therefore, one can suggest that the Nephilim never did survive the flood, these being the ones with the supernatural heritage, on the account of their fathers being angels. Every other giant since then, however, may have simply been misappropriated under the term Nephilim, even though their fathers weren't fallen angels, and they weren't monstrous creatures. In fact, the only thing these second generation giants had in common with the Nephilim was that they were on the losing side when it came to God putting over his chosen people.
Well, there you have it. The Nephilim as described in the book of Enoch. Um, all those different names for these giants, Anakim, Rephaim, Zamzumans in one place. A lot of mystery about these creatures, but they are included in the Bible. The most notable of these being Goliath that we know of. So a little bit of a rabbit trail today in Jude, but the fact that he mentioned them, the sons of God and the daughters of men, and creating this race, we needed to touch on that because obviously 2,000 years ago, the followers of Jesus understood and knew. They knew their history. They knew more, I guess, about these entities than we do. And so what was a mystery to us was maybe not so much of a mystery to them. But we'll pick it up again next week in the book of Jude and talk about the false prophets again, that false teachers, the wolves in sheep's clothing, that we needed to be aware of and contend for the faith. As our pastor friend said, let that be what we take away from this. We need to be defenders of the faith. All right, have a great week.